The following program is an independent production, apart from DJDP Productions. The views, opinions, and ideas of the producers of The Darkest Hour do not necessarily reflect those of the staff of DJDP Productions, its partners or affiliates. The producers of The Darkest Hour with Amanda Jane of Forget Me Not assume all responsibility for the content of its program. Should you have questions or concerns regarding The Darkest Hour with Amanda Jane, please contact the producers directly. Or you may also contact the staff at Neo Retro FM through email at djdphoenix@protonmail.com. Be sure to include the date of the program and the subject matter you're inquiring about. And now, Neo Retro FM presents The Darkest Hour with Amanda Jane, streamed live from Marysville, Washington.
For tomorrow, we embark on the darkest hour.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to The Darkest Hour. I'm your host, Amanda Jane. Loss can be difficult. Sometimes we lose something, other times we lose someone. But are any of these things, these people, truly gone? Or are they simply waiting to be found, waiting for connection? Is it possible that what feels like it's gone forever is only temporarily out of our grasp? Well, I believe many things are possible. And tonight, we'll hear from others who feel the same. So, let's get started, shall we? When I was very young, I had issues with sleeping, and that's kind of an understatement. I was young, and it started as small things, screaming and crying for my parents to come to my room, being and feeling literally paralyzed. Going to them was never an option. I don't consider those the experiences I had, though, because I don't remember all of them, and I couldn't tell you why I was crying or screaming. If we go back to the beginning, my family's living in San Antonio, Texas, and the first encounter that I truly remember was when I was getting ready for my first day of school, kindergarten. I remember waking up real early. Must have been dawn, as I could see the sun barely starting to poke through the house. Like a lot of things at that age, I was very anxious, but excited. As I sat on my floor, I was preparing to put on my new shoes, when I started to hear a strange buzzing or humming coming from outside my window. It was loud, but I remember thinking not loud like when someone was having yard work done, or loud like airplanes that I'd seen fly by, but it was more noticeable. I was distracted and attracted to it instantly. Though the humming made me feel strange, like car sick, I couldn't sit still. So I got up and I looked out my window, then immediately ran to the stairwell outside of my room, where there was a much larger window. What I saw was a very large silver disc. It had round edges, but they were quickly moving out of view. So now all I could see was what had to have been the bottom of this disc. I recall best its intense size, so large that even when looking up the much bigger window, the disc was now covering it entirely, sweeping the whole home in a dark gray, like it had never been dawn. I could see small blue lights lining the underside. They were the brightest blue that I'd ever seen. Its shape, the lights, and even the noise, or lack thereof, They're all honestly rather comparable to things I've seen in video games and artistic depictions throughout my life, perhaps inspired by similar experiences. I ran to my parents' room, grabbing my mom, or attempting to anyways. She was in the bathroom getting ready for work and wasn't accepting my pleas. She was more interested in the fact that I was already ready for school. My claims of seeing something in the sky were overlooked. She even dismissed my question about the noise, the humming. I walked out of the bathroom and sat on their bed, waiting for my mom. I peeked out into the hallway to see if it was still covered in a dark gray. It was. Eventually, my mom walked out of the bathroom, laughing, saying, "Let's go, okay, let's go check it out." Likely not believing what I was going to show her. When we got to the stairwell, it was gone. I ran down the stairs to look out all of the windows on either side of the house. Nothing was in the sky. Whatever massive disc-like object I'd just experienced was now nothing. Even as a kindergartner, I felt a massive letdown. My mom rubbing my head, saying, "It was probably a plane." I knew that it wasn't a plane. After that experience, I started to remember odd dreams, recalling things that seemed like fiction, but through the years of personal research and support, my stories and experiences, they're not much different than others. Until I was a teenager, about 17, I would have the same dream very often, at least the same setup every time. My room would be engulfed in that same blue light. Everything was dark except that blue light. The next moment, I would remember a feeling, as though I was free-falling. The same feeling I'd get if I jumped off the tall diving board at the community center. Each time, just as my stomach would drop, I'd open my eyes and be blinded by now the whitest light I'd ever seen. I was always lying on a table. It was always cold. I never felt any pain, but I was uncomfortable. Only when something was directly above me, covering the lights, could I see anything at all. Elongated gray figures. Their shape mostly like ours, but their head longer, skinnier. The skin looked like shiny leather, but I don't know what it felt like, not at that time. They didn't appear to move their mouths when they spoke, but I could understand them. At first, I wouldn't say things out loud, too afraid, but I could understand their responses to my unasked questions. They were in tune with my concerns, and they tried to ease them the best that they could. Early on, I would tell my parents about these experiences, and naturally they chalked them up to bad dreams. They lumped these experiences in with the rest of the sleep issues that I'd had in my life. When I was about 11 or 12, I'd mustered up enough courage to learn a little bit more, or at least try to learn more. I found myself in the same familiar position, the lights, the table, the grays. I felt a strange sense of safety, and I think it was around this time I stopped fighting the experiences. I laid on the table, as I usually did, but this time I was able to hear my own voice outside my head, simply asking what they were doing. Their response wasn't spoken out loud, instead, telepathically. They must have known more about me than I knew about myself, because their answer fit what I could understand at the time. A statement simple enough for a fourth grader to understand. They were trying to figure out how to make people live longer. In the same thought, they asked if I felt I was in a safe place. I told them yes, that I wasn't afraid of their ship. I asked if I could even get down, if I could explore the ship. What's strange is I don't remember details like how long it took or things like that. The details are literally clouded. What I remember is that it felt as though everything was covered in a blinding white light, and it prevented me from seeing much of anything. I have a vague memory of walking out of a room and past several other blindingly white rooms. Inside each room, there was another person, one that looked more like me and not like these grays. I also realized that outside of laying on the exam table, I didn't see any grays anywhere. Not even walking with me. I felt like someone was with me, but I don't recall seeing anyone. I don't actually know who or what was guiding me around the ship. A separate trip, or dream, several weeks later, I had a similar experience. Always starting the same, but this time, I started to talk right away. I told the room that I could hardly recall what I'd seen before, explaining that I was curious and I wanted to know more about the ship that I'd spent so much time on, but couldn't recall. I have small memories of gazing through what must have been their command center or control area. It honestly looked like something out of Star Trek or Star Wars, the only thing I could truly compare it to until computers and flat screens would become a thing of the future. Underneath these screens or monitors, there were markings, writings that I didn't understand. They seemed more like shapes than words, I thought to myself. And what are those? Instantly, I was given an answer in my mind. They're like numbers, so each has its own. Suddenly, I was inside this command center. Previously on the outside looking in, now I was standing inside, and beneath me was a glass floor. I felt that stomach drop feeling, but when I realized what was below me, I went from scared to utterly amazed. Here I was, a 12-year-old, in space. I could see Earth below my feet, and it looked so magnificent. While I was gazing out, I got a reply in my head, or a comment really, of thank you. They'd read my mind. What I'd thought in that moment was they, the Greys, were free to take me to their ship any time, that I wanted to learn about them, that everything was not so scary, but instead really beautiful. That trip, as I call it, led me down a different path. It was after that encounter that I personally started to realize these were good beings. My sleep problems all but resolved themselves. I was never scared, never feeling paralyzed or needing someone to help me. I really anticipated these trips from that moment on, and I stopped telling my parents about them. Each time, I would go to sleep and not have these experiences. I found myself disappointed instead of relieved. The next time that it would happen, I was exposed to even more. This was the first time that I recall seeing these beings walk around with me. I went from being on the exam table to holding the hand of one of them. It didn't feel like leather, though, which I initially thought it would. It felt like a silk sheet, soft and light. I looked down and it was thin, grayish, long fingers. Where are we going, I thought. And just like that, I heard in my head, a place much like Earth. They walked me to a big room where I could again see through the floor. No big monitors in this room, though. Instead, it was filled with green. And as I looked down, I could see a maze. The best way to explain where they took me was the labyrinth that they show in The Shining, but much, much larger. It seemed to cover everything, that everything was one big, beautiful maze. I could see nothing except green. When we stepped onto the surface, it felt like thick moss, but dry. For what felt like hours, I had a telepathic conversation with two of these beings. Now, here in this light, their skin much more green. They were still tall and very skinny, long, slim faces and eyes that looked like goggles, but they looked less shiny. And now, without holding my hand, I couldn't be sure that they felt the same or not. What I remember most outside of the green is that I felt a strong wave of reassurance hit me throughout this whole conversation, though I can't remember exactly what we talked about. It felt like what I think meditation feels like now as an adult. I didn't have a ton of friends at this time, but I imagined this was what a real friendship would feel like. And each time I saw them after that experience, I told them that. We would go back to this place at least 2 more times, and each time I would walk away with a new detail, the hedges perfectly shaped and surrounding the area, the sky, how it wasn't blue and there was no sun, but it emanated the same warmth as Earth. Getting older, I would question these experiences, these beings, going from afraid to missing them. Why didn't I ever feel the need to touch anything? I was in awe by so many things, but at the same time, I felt as though I wasn't entirely controlling my thoughts or actions. Hypnotized, if you will. I started to think that maybe these were dreams. Maybe my whole childhood was one long dream. Maybe I'm just a creative, I thought often. Well, eventually, as I got older, these visits became less and less frequent. When deciding I wasn't afraid, I spent a good amount of time trying to induce these experiences. However, I didn't have the internet at the time, so this was really just me asking out loud that they come back. One night, I was about 16, and I found myself in a paralyzed state for the first time in years, but in the same bright room. I got excited and thought, yes, it's finally happening again. I was told repeatedly, "You are okay, you are safe." As I laid there, I felt their words whirl through my head. They told me that they would have to leave me alone for a while, and that I would see them just one last time. I felt a tear roll down my cheek, and then I was awake in my bed. Usually, it didn't seem to happen so quickly like that. They would drop me off, and I would drift back to sleep until morning. But this time, one moment I was in that room, and the next, I was hurled into my bed. No dreamlike state, just snapped back to reality. That day felt like my best friend had told me they were moving. I had what I considered good friends, but these beings seemed to know me the best. I felt so calm with them. Why would they want to leave me like this? The last time I saw them, there were so many of them. I woke up on the exam table. So many elongated heads with glassy eyes looking down at me. I was told not to be scared, that they wanted to test something on me. They said that if I was in agreement with this test, they would not be able to see me ever again. I felt sadness sweep over me again, and internally, I was saying no way. I was very sad, and I told them I didn't want to lose them, as we were very close. They told me that this was very important to them, that they needed my help. They reminded me that I'd been working towards something with them for a long time now. They told me that sacrificing our relationship could change the future of their research, could change my future. I agreed, reluctantly, but a genuine agreement to their request. Smoothly, I was moved from the exam table to what looked like a giant silver egg. It was the first time I'd seen the color red in this space, I thought, while looking at the glowing red lights that surrounded the egg. And just like so many other things before this moment, I essentially walked into it without asking any questions. There was a small chair built on the inside of the egg, along with what looked like seat belts and tools hanging from the inside. I was about to ask for someone to get in there with me, When two of these beings approached me, I felt at ease. These were my friends. They placed their hands on my shoulders, and they reassured me just by doing that. Another being, one whom didn't feel familiar, just looked like the rest, walked up to me, and I was then presented with a large medical syringe with a needle, maybe 2 inches long. Inside the syringe was a neon green fluid. I asked if it was going to hurt, and they said yes, but that I wouldn't remember that part. They said for now, just remember that I was helping them. They would explain more later. I nodded that I was ready, and instantly I was injected with the fluid. I felt a quick pinch in my left arm, and just as I thought something was going to hurt, the next thing I remember is being fine. I felt my cheeks, which were wet, like I had been crying. I remembered my arm and looked over. 3 small green bumps. No pain. And I felt the comfort of one of them placing their hand in mine. I expressed I felt fine, but really wanted to understand what we had done. They told me that what they had given me, it would preserve my life. What I remember most is they tried to make me understand that by actually sharing their plans, they'd be putting themselves at risk, that I could destroy them. I put effort into trying to make them understand that I would never do something like that. They were concerned about their own safety, it appeared. So I stopped pressing for too much information and instead asked if there was any way that I would be able to know if it's working. How will they know if it's working or not? There were no real answers offered to those questions, though. I felt tired. That was a new feeling. If you take care of yourself, yourself will take care of you. These were the words that I remembered the most, repeating them even after I found myself awake the next morning and days and years to follow. That next morning, though, I thought of my arm, and for the first time ever, I felt like I had pulled something out of my experience and brought it back with me. 3 small green bumps on my left arm. They stayed on my skin for a couple of days, and I tried to keep them covered up. One day in the shower, they popped. I half expected green fluid to rush out of them, but nothing came out of them. Instead, it just looked like I had 3 small blisters that had popped. That morning, my dad saw my arm and asked me what the hell had happened. When I looked over, I could see that where the bumps had been, I had 3 marks that resembled rather large burns. And they were red. My parents took me to the ER just to make sure that it wasn't some sort of infection. And no, I didn't bother telling anyone about my experience. Honestly, at the time, I felt conflicted. Either no one will believe me and I'll be labeled as crazy, or I betray a whole society that has done nothing but try to help and preserve my life, as far as I saw it. What I told the doctor was that I woke up and I had 3 small welts on my arm, that they popped in the shower and now they look like this. They look infected, my dad clarified. The doctors took samples and prescribed me some chemical burn cream, saying that my burns closely resembled someone who'd been in contact with hazardous chemicals or some sort of harmful organic material. It helped and they reduced in size for sure, but they definitely left me with 3 small scars. I never saw my friends again. No more exams, no more meditation-like conversations, and a whole lot of questions. Questions I didn't even consider at a young age. Questions that I never actually got to ask inside or outside my head. As I said, I never told my parents about those experiences, the later ones, and I never really told anyone about them. It took me several years to actually indulge these ideas. I felt like I'd spent time grieving these individuals, the loss of our friendship. The memories, though fragmented and difficult to explain appropriately at times, they do not fade the way that my dreams do. The feelings that I experienced and the sensation of touch and connection, what I took away from it, it never fades away. I could feel myself literally growing mentally each time, and the feelings of anxiety and stress became obsolete, my health concerns obsolete. I was a terrified kid who seemed to always have something wrong with them, but I grew into a functioning, healthy adolescent, and then into what I guess I would consider a normal, healthy adult. I'm 50 years old now, a horse veterinarian. I'm not married, but I've been with my partner for several decades. We have no kids, but plenty of animals. For a long time, my partner was the only one that I'd ever told about these trips. Much like now and any time since, I've only ever written them down, as speaking them into existence I never felt comfortable with. My partner never pried, just simply told me, "I believe you. I'll always believe you forever." My experiences haven't defined us in any way, and outside of that little note-passing session, we don't really talk about it. I have joined several online forums and shared my story since. I mainly joined these groups to see if my takeaway was correct. Were there other people like me on that ship? Because if so, some of them were bound to have written about it. I didn't need proof, but curiosity and the excitement of the internet got the best of me. By the time I was sharing with others, I'd accepted my experiences as truth. When I found out that people who shared their experiences and confirmations were actually helping others, that's when I decided to start sharing instead of just observing. To this day, every time I feel far away from something, or any time I start to go into a negative place, I appreciate having these 3 little scars as a reminder. I have experienced so much, and I'm so grateful. And I remember those words always. Regardless of the situation, I seem to find a way to apply it to my life. I don't know if it means the same thing to everyone, or if others receive the same words. I just know that it hasn't let me down yet. If you take care of yourself, yourself will take care of you. This is a rather short story. Because I was so young, I try not to exaggerate the details and only provide what I truly remember versus what I think I saw and heard. So here goes. When I was about 4 years old, I remember getting a light bright. I had an older sister, and I think it was actually hers, but as siblings close in age often do, we shared everything. One day, I was in our room sitting on a beanbag, playing with my stuffed animals. I remember seeing the light bright suddenly become illuminated. At the time, I didn't think that this was strange. In fact, it switched my attention completely, and I went to play with the light bright. I sat in front of it and touched the small peg lights. I grabbed a couple of my bears, asking them what I should make, when I actually got a response. I thought this was my bear at first, so I laughed and laughed. The response was me. Make me. I stopped laughing and told my bear that I was going to make him, and then I started to pull out the peg lights. Then I heard it again. This time it sounded stronger, and it said, "No, me. Make me." I looked around because I knew it wasn't my bear this time. It sounded like it came from the light bright itself. I sat there a minute and remember almost going to get my mom. I don't remember what I was doing right when the next thing happened, but I was looking at my bear, trying to figure out what exactly I was supposed to be making. Maybe it was Dolly, I shouted excitedly, grabbing my baby doll and asking her. Then I sat back down and continued to pull out the peg lights. Once they were all out, I started to put the peg lights back in, forming the head of my doll. I went to put in the eyes, looking back at Dolly to confirm, yes, they are blue. As I put the blue lights in the center for the eyes, I hear an angry but familiar no. The same voice as before had become even more angry with my choices. I wasn't scared, I was sad. And then I was scared. What followed the angry no were sparks. Sparks began to fly from the light bright, and I ran out of the room screaming. This is where I don't have much memory. I'm sure I tried to explain to my mom what I heard, what I saw, but she was now dealing with sparks flying out of this new toy. I never saw the toy again, and I never heard the voice again. Curious, does anyone else have experiences like this from their childhood? Something that they couldn't explain, but it left an impression for whatever reason.
Hey, kid.
Who, me?
Hey, kid.
No,
Come over here.
I don't really.
I got some commercial breaks. You ever tried one of these?
I really
Give it a shot. Here, first one's on the house.
Neo Retro FM, live from Olympia, Washington. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Modern music programming. NeoRetroFM.com. Are you afraid of the dark? Well, don't be. Instead, grab yourself a candle. Not just any candle, though. Grab yourself a seance, or pure hate. Decide for yourself as you browse. The Candle Collection by Forget Me Not. There's a little something for everyone. You'll see. Visit conductedbyforgetmenot.com to learn more about this collection.
How'd that go?
That was okay, but do you have any stories?
You should have told me sooner. I got plenty of those.
This is a story about one of my babysitters growing up. My mom was a single parent who worked nights, which meant that I usually had a babysitter putting me to sleep. Around this time in our lives, I typically had the same babysitter. Her name was Olivia, and she lived in my apartment complex. At the time, I wasn't sure how old she was, but she'd sometimes come over in a uniform that she told me was for her school. Naturally, I remember this detail because as a child in public school who had no idea what private school was, I found it so odd that she wore a uniform to school, like my mom going to work in her uniform. But she was an adult, I remember thinking. Adults wear uniforms. Either way, I really liked Olivia. Usually I hated when my hair would get brushed, or if my mom tried to do anything to it, I'd make a fuss. But with Olivia, I was okay with her doing my hair. Plus, she could do French braids, and I loved that. I never had any sisters, or aunts, or cousins for that matter, so having Olivia around was nice. She seemed to like me, which I guess is a sign that she was a good babysitter, because she never made me feel like I was a bother. Instead of cutting off my stories or getting distracted like other adults, she would always actually pay attention, ask me questions about what I was saying. She made me do my chores. She had me thinking about things that I'd never thought about before, like where I wanted to go in the world, and why were cheetahs my favorite animal. The thing was, I had issues with bedwetting early on when Olivia had first started. I wasn't used to my mom being gone at night, and I'd get nervous. I remember her making me feel normal about it. She even agreed to just clean the sheets right then and there, creating a giant living room floor bed with all the blankets that she could find. After that, I was sold, and I was sure to tell my mom every chance I got that I loved Olivia and that she had to be the one to babysit me. And usually, she was. Sometimes I'd get a rando, but that was super rare. I could pretty much always count on Olivia being there. But one day, she literally just didn't show up. My mom was really upset, and she knew it wasn't like her. I had the typical last-minute replacement, the very old woman in the apartment below ours. My mom only used her as a last resort because she refused to come to our apartment, and her apartment smelled rather bad, and I always seemed to be complaining about it. But then the next day, I was also with that same old lady babysitter. Then that turned into 2 or 3 days, and I'm not sure how many, but still, no Olivia. I started to get curious, asking my mom when she would be back. My mom didn't seem to have any answers for me. We moved very shortly after, and I remember telling my mom I hated her for this. I told her that if Olivia ever came back, we wouldn't be here, and she would never be able to find us. I didn't know at the time that these words were super hurtful to my mom. I also had no idea why we were moving. So for the next 9 years, I would move on in life thinking that Olivia just abandoned me, that she never actually liked me. I thought that she moved away first and just didn't tell me. My mom constantly tried to stick up for her, saying that sometimes people move on in life, that I would understand when I was older that this was not personal. Even though I didn't walk around angry for the next several years, I often thought about her. Sometimes I would even have dreams about her. But over time, those faded too. But 9 years later, on a random night, I saw Olivia. I was dreaming, or at least I thought I was. I felt pressure on the bed, like when my cat lays down, but my cat was on the other side of me. I shot up, and sitting at the edge of my bed was Olivia. She looked like she was reading a story. She wasn't looking at me, she was looking to her left. I leaned forward, and it was like I was watching an old movie of my life. It was Olivia sitting next to me, reading my favorite story, which was Harold and the Purple Crayon. I felt like saying something, but the moment seemed so peaceful that I just watched. My mom never owned a video camera, so I never actually got to see videos of me as a child. I couldn't even be sure that this moment really happened, but I could be sure that she read me that story tirelessly. One time even going as far as taping paper all over the walls so I could color with my own giant purple crayon. I have some solid photos of that experience, thanks to her. I was enjoying the show, basically, but within a blink of my eyes, I was sitting up leaned over as I was before, but there was no scene unfolding in front of me. I sort of laid there and realized that I wasn't dreaming, at least not anymore. Yet, I never actually felt myself wake up out of that moment. I just blinked it away. Having not seen her in almost 10 years, I thought it was wild, and I got the idea to ask my mom what the heck actually happened to Olivia. It turns out that Olivia went missing. At least that was the story my mom was told right away. She learned within a few days, maybe a week, that Olivia was taken by a man that murdered her. This man was actually responsible for several missing girls around Olivia's age in our area. I learned that she was 17 at the time. It was Olivia's case that actually led to the man being where he is now, which is in prison. My mom took this opportunity to explain a lot of things, including why we moved cities so suddenly after Olivia left. But with this newly learned detail about what really happened, everything just sort of made sense. It was just a few weeks, maybe a week after the last time I'd seen Olivia, that I had a dream about her. She was crying and telling me she was sorry, telling me that she would never just leave me alone. In the dream, I started angry with her, but I felt bad that she was crying, so instead, I consoled her, telling her that it was okay, just as she would do with me when I was sad, when I was crying. I forgave her in that dream, and I'm so glad that I did because I think it really was her, coming to say goodbye and to explain herself. She knew I was too young to understand everything at the time. I'm sure of it, just like my mom knew. but she did everything she could to try to make one last connection with me, and I cherish that. Growing up, I always wondered why my mom never wanted to go camping, and she never really wanted us to go camping either. She seemed to be okay with the idea of sending us away to summer camp, but these were camps that felt more like extended field trips, spending most of our time inside exhibits, taking bus rides to places that were further away from the places that we'd be staying for the night, but never the woods. Always the beach or the city, somewhere well-populated and sleeping indoors. One day, I finally got the explanation I was looking for. I had been looking through a lot of old photographs for a school project, and I couldn't help but notice that a majority of them included my mom in the woods. So, this is a story about the last time my mom actually did go camping, and though I don't share her fear, in my life I've gone camping many times, I do completely understand her extreme hesitation. As a child and through her 20s, she was a very accomplished camper and survival enthusiast. My parents actually met while hiking the Appalachian Trail, and they did this together for several years. My mom also enjoyed going on solo trips, often for at least 2 weeks, completely on her own. Even after she met my dad, she would continue to take these solo trips to an extent, sometimes for work and sometimes leisurely. This was one of those solo, leisurely trips. My mom explained that she'd always pick a spot that wasn't as well known to your average hiker, and through her work of scouting out these places, she often got what she was looking for, which was solidarity with nature. She would usually stop at a store, the last one on the outskirts of town, and this was to grab anything last minute, and a piece of her always wanted to be seen in the event that something should happen while she was out there. Usually, this store was the last time she'd see someone for several days, and it was usually just the person that was working there. She decided to stop at a gas station. She was sure there was another store, but certain that it would not have gas. While the gas was filling up, she sat in her car and just started looking around the parking lot when she saw one guy sitting in his truck, parked in front of the store. She was surprised to see that he was just staring at her. Uncomfortable, she tried to look away casually, looking over in every other direction. As she tells me this story, she makes it clear that at that time, she was uncomfortable, but she was used to guys making her feel that way. She wasn't terrified or anything like that. She just wanted the man that was pumping her gas, this was in Oregon State, to just be done already. And soon enough, he was. My mom just handed him a 20 and drove off. For the next hour, she passed nothing but nature, and she stopped along the highway to capture some photos of a moose and pretty landscapes. She saw some bears, but didn't think it wise to pull in their direction, so she just enjoyed them from afar and kept on her route. Finally, she reached the last store and headed inside to get something to snack on before she was officially eating her Moon Man food, as she called it. Settling on some Skittles and Doritos, she turned around and found herself face to face with a man. The same man. She sort of jumped back, said excuse me, and proceeded to the counter quickly. She didn't turn around to see for sure, but her peripherals, she saw someone leave the store just as quickly as she'd gone to the counter. The clerk saying, "That was strange," and laughing. My mom tried to laugh, but instead it came out as an awkward, "What?" To which the clerk replied, "That guy. He was just sitting in his truck staring at you, and then he walked right up to you. I thought he knew you or something, but looks like he didn't." My mom grabbed her stuff and watched as the truck drove out of the parking lot. She was relieved to see it turn in the opposite direction that she would be heading. "Must have thought I was someone else," she said as she left the store. She was sure that she had just officially seen the last human that she would see for several days now. Still at that moment, not terrified, but a little bit spooked that she was sure that was the same guy in the same truck. About 20 minutes on the road, she'd all but forgotten about it, focusing on the gorgeous scenery and the isolation. It wasn't until she was only a few minutes away from taking the last real road before the dirt roads kicked in that she noticed someone was behind her. It was in that moment that her palms started to sweat. Something told her that this wasn't right. Sure, it could be a random someone, also out in this very random place at this very random time, but she knew, and only in that moment, that it was going to be that truck, and it was going to be that man. Instead of turning where she had planned, she kept driving forward. The truck didn't stop following her, and it was keeping its distance. No matter how much my mom slowed down, it stayed the same distance behind her. She decided that she was going to turn around. If the truck followed her, then she had something to worry about. If it didn't, then she was fine. She found a turnabout, turned her car around and headed back to the road she initially intended on taking. As she circled back, she saw the truck kept passing, and it didn't appear to be turning around. She kept driving at a very slow pace, just to see if she had missed them turning around. No cars, no headlights. All was well. Turning down the road, she suddenly felt safer, thinking to herself that maybe she had just gotten herself scared. The last time, she couldn't even be sure that it was the same truck. By the end of the day, she was all but over it. Her day had been filled with some amazing nature, and she felt truly alone in a good way. The spot she had picked was perfectly placed far enough away from the water, so less bugs, and the air was perfect. That morning, the first thing she saw when she opened her tent was a Polaroid that had "Hi" written on it. My mom didn't have a Polaroid camera. The Polaroid was of my mom, sleeping in her tent. To this day, she says the only time she moved faster in her life than in that moment was when she got the call that I'd been in a car accident and was headed to the hospital. She said she impressed herself with how quickly she managed to take her tent down, and actually that she managed to take it down at all. I joke with her that sure, it's impressive, but it's also very stupid in the event that this photographer was lurking around. All jokes aside, though, I'm glad this creep didn't do more than just take a photo of my mom. She says that too. That she was lucky. That was all that happened. It truly scared her to the core, and it changed how she interacted with nature entirely, so I think that part is pretty sad. Although she keeps a pretty amazing garden and is nothing short of an arborist herself, so I think she finds safe ways to keep herself surrounded by the things that she loves, so that it's not a total loss. And I can't say that I blame her. When I was about 6 years old, I had an imaginary friend. That's what everyone around me called her anyways. The thing was that I could really see her. When I said, "No, don't sit there. Laura is sitting there," I meant it. I did quickly realize that no one could hurt Laura. I realized this when my brother would repeatedly sit on her. He was a few years older than me, and at the time, got his kicks by making me upset. Laura and what she wore were white or light blue colored. She looked human, but she also truly looked ghostly, transparent in a sense. I couldn't always see Laura, usually only a few times a month. When she was gone, I didn't miss her, as I felt like she was still around, I just couldn't see her. My mom would constantly ask me who I was talking to, as Laura and I would play in my room often. Each time I'd proudly explain it was Laura. I said Laura doesn't talk as much as I do, but no one ever acknowledged her. One day I woke up and I found a small bracelet on my bedside table. I thought at first it was from my mom, but then there was Laura. She told me that I could have it, that it was for me, and it was a friendship bracelet. I was excited. I went and told my mom about it. I recall her looking at the bracelet over and over and continuing to ask me where I got it, and I continuing to explain that it was from Laura. She asked me if I'd been going up to the attic or the garage. I told her no, that I was sure Laura gave it to me because she told me. I didn't get in trouble, but my mom was not happy, as she felt I wasn't being honest. This made me feel like I shouldn't tell my mom about Laura anymore. The same week, I imagine, I found myself in my mom's room looking through her jewelry. She had so many bracelets, I thought. One of them is bound to be perfect for Laura, a friendship bracelet for her. I grabbed one that I thought I'd never seen my mom wear, and that night I left it on my bedside table for Laura. The next morning, it was gone. I was confronted by my mom before I got a chance to see Laura again. She asked if I'd been in her room, if I took something from her jewelry box. I was honest, telling her yes. Laura gave me something, so I felt I needed to give her something. I told her I left it on the side table, so Laura must have taken it. She was furious, telling me that I stole from her and that bracelet was Grandma's. I'd better find it. I'd never seen her so mad. She told me that I was lying to her, and now I was crying. So much so that I ran away and shut myself in the bathroom. Soon my mom was at the door, asking me to come out and to please talk to her. I opened the door and somberly followed her back to my room. When we got inside my room, my mom stopped. She was frozen, staring at my bed. I looked over and I saw, on the bedside table, my grandma's bracelet. I looked up at my mom. She was still in shock. She looked down at me. "Okay, sweetie, tell me more about Laura." I don't remember how long we talked, but I told her as much as I could about Laura. She listened and asked me if Laura was there now. She wasn't, but I agreed to tell her when Laura was around, and she agreed to not sit on her and would ask my brother to do the same. As time went on, I didn't see Laura so often, and I can't even pinpoint the actual last time I saw her. There was no significant events after that one, and no real goodbye either. Eventually, Laura felt more like a dream or a memory, the way kindergarten or my first day of middle school felt, or anything else that seemed significant, but with time, it just truly fades away. My mom to this day says that I alone made her a believer in ghosts. I'm still not sure if Laura was a ghost, as I don't really know if that's an insult or not to the people on Laura's side. I just know that for a while, I had a friend that no one could see, and I also know that without being in my head or sharing my experiences, it all sounds a little far-fetched. But I assure you, Laura was as real as anything else I've seen. When I was about 11 years old, we lived in Texas. We'd lived there for several years, but recently had moved to a new, bigger house. It was bigger, but much further away from practically everything. I had to change schools, which I didn't really mind. Well, the house came with its fair share of oddities, and I would experience them right away. It was early into our move because we had boxes everywhere. I'd gone to the kitchen to get something to drink before finishing unpacking my room. On the way back, I stopped to pet my cats who were laying on the sofa. As I did, I felt something strange happen with my hearing. It was like someone put earmuffs on me and everything was muted. My cats and my dog, they all seemed rather calm. I looked up and around, my eyes making their way over to the large fish tank that sat in the main room. There was a woman, not a shadow, but a woman, with light-colored hair that looked to be pulled about halfway back in a long blue robe. She looked about the age of my mom or maybe my aunt. She was as visible, as solid, as the wall she stood in front of. I'd never seen this woman before, and just as I went to call out to her, I could see that her feet were not touching the ground. She appeared to be standing on a solid surface, but about a foot off the floor. I wasn't scared at this point, just carefully observing, so maybe I was actually in the same trance-like state. As I continued to watch the woman, I saw her lift her arm and point just behind me. Turning to look, I jumped as the phone rang. My hearing certainly wasn't muted anymore. I stared at the phone, knowing I wasn't going to pick it up. Then my mom ran in and picked up the phone. Just then, I turned around, but the woman was gone. I looked back at my mom, who's on her second or third hello, and then I watched her hang up and start to walk away, but I stopped her, asking her who was on the phone. She told me it was no one. It was silent and all she could hear was an echo. Then she really walked away. The next observation I made was while in the kitchen. Since I usually shadowed my mom in there, she thought I had accidentally turned the stove off. I hadn't. This went on for weeks. Finally, we both watched it turn off together. My mom seemed to think that it was the stove itself, but I couldn't help but notice each time this would happen with the stove, the phone would ring. And each time, no one. I recall my mom chalking things up to bad electrical and telemarketers. This explanation held up as the activity sort of faded away after those first couple weeks. Just a year after that experience, I found myself very interested in family trees, stuff like that. My mom, not being a family historian by any means, took me to see my grandma. She had kept all the photos and had a wealth of information. Sitting on her floor, going through photo albums, I pointed to a photo. It was the woman from our living room. That's when my grandma explained that her sister, my great-aunt, was killed in a car accident when she was in her early 40s. My grandma also explained that my great-aunt was a practicing Gardenian priestess. Yeah, at the time, I definitely didn't know what that was. She told me my great-aunt believed in paganism, and my grandma said that I was a kindred spirit, which is probably why she came to visit me and to show herself. I feel like I've since picked up where my great-aunt left off, so no fear about the experience. I only wish that I would have been the one to answer those calls. And so, we've reached the end of The Darkest Hour. I'd like to thank everyone for listening tonight, and to remind you to join me every Friday night at 11 p.m., only on neoretrofm.com. Do you have stories like these? I'd love to share them. Send them to me, Amanda, Darkest Hour, @gmail.com, or on Reddit, Amanda Jane, FMN. Stay spooky.